Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Modulated versus Quick Shifts in Practice. We've actually had quite a number of questions regarding how to know when to use modulated versus when to use quick shifts. So we thought maybe the most efficient way to address this with a little bit of depth would be to do a quick one-hour webinar. So welcome. I would say that as opposed to a question that I often get, how do I keep headphones on? That would be the #1 most frequently asked question. I'm often now getting the question, how do I know when to use quick shifts versus modulated? If I'm using modulated and I want to use quick shifts, do I need to finish modulated first, or do I listen once a day or twice a day? So we're going to attempt to answer all of those questions within this webinar. And I'm going to start off with also a case that really kind of brought this freshly to my mind. I think that for the past maybe 6 months to a year, I kept hearing that question over and over again in different webinars and was able to touch on it briefly, but not really give it the attention that was needed. And then within the last 3 weeks, a therapist who has been doing therapeutic listening for many, many, many years, a really very competent therapist friend of mine sent me this case that she was struggling with, and it sort of brought the question really freshly into my mind and decided to use this case and many others to answer those questions for people. So this was a young lady who was 14 years of age in the 8th grade. She had no history of significant developmental concerns. She had had some recent, like in the last month or so, this is very fresh, like this is an ongoing case, but in the last month or so, a recent panic attack that sent her to the ER. And she had had 2 previous panic attacks 2 years prior, which they placed her on Prozac to try to keep that in check. So she was recommended to OT by a friend of the family who knew her treating therapist, because along with the panic attacks, they were seeing this real increased sensitivity to light touch, so the tactile defensiveness. And a friend of the family said, I know this great OT who works with tactile issues and also helping kids to calm down and really stay in a more alert state. So she was referred to her therapist at that point. The presenting concerns during that initial evaluation were flattened affect, difficulty sleeping, and even falling asleep, and then irregular sleep patterns. You see that whole arousal piece, a limited diet, and that, again, the big one, that heightened sensitivity to light touch, decreased energy. And she also had these other symptoms that we might surmise a little bit perceptual in nature start to really verge into mental health concerns. And I would say that we're getting more and more of these cases of individuals that don't have a huge history of developmental issues, or possibly do, but this sort of blending into mental health. And so I think a lot of you are probably seeing many clients, maybe on the autism spectrum, maybe not, who are just coming with sensory processing disorder as a label, that have this incidence of really high anxiety. So her therapist's goals for her were to regain a calm, alert state, really improve her affect, and support like more appropriate social emotional control, because during this recent episode, she was really unable to socialize and to go out with her friends. She wasn't able to go to school. So this heightened anxiety that had this sensory processing overlay was keeping her out of daily function. So the little young lady Erin's goals for herself were she really wanted to complete end of the year testing and get so that she could go to high school, because 8th grade and then moving into high school is a critical period. And then, of course, always to attend that 8th grade graduation ceremony and, the social piece of that and parties around that, and then return to some of the extracurricular activities that she was doing with her friends. So tumbling was one of those. So when Gail first saw her, her initial plan was she did an sensory diet with intensive deep pressure and heavy work activities, and then also worked on extending the exhalation of her breath. She gave her a number of activities with those were the goals of those activities, again, to help regulate state. And she decided to use therapeutic listening because when you look at, if we were to go back and look at that initial list, these are actually symptoms right here that we talk about where modulated music would be helpful, and that you might be using something from that regulation and engagement box. And often we would recommend links to modulation, which was formerly known as easy listening. So, or something from that line of that easy listening music that is modulated with a high-low pass filter. So that's a very solid recommendation based on the information that her therapist had during the initial evaluation. And mind you, that during this initial evaluation, she didn't do any formalized testing because her client was sort of in extreme emotional distress, and it wasn't really a possibility. So it was really much more of an interview with mom and the young lady and getting started to see if they could do anything to help abate some of these symptoms. So the changes that they observed were increased sensitivity to sound, touch and movement. So this is not good. Now we're going in the opposite direction. So instead of her getting more modulated, they saw the anxiety rise up, the sensitivities rise up, and now a new symptom where she refused to get in the car to participate in any of her extracurricular activities. So now she was even more housebound. So this is where her therapist is frantically typing emails to me, and I'm like, very interesting. And I am actually immediately responding to her with the caveat, try what I told her, to try the regulation too, and if it doesn't make an impact, email me back right away because I have other ideas, and I'll share some of those with you here. And so she continued, she did the regulation too, and continued with sensory diet as part of her home program. So the sensory diet that she had done with the links to modulation, and within 5 days, she had increased facial expression. She was smiling and laughing a lot more. Her eating had improved. Her sleep was a lot better. She was a lot less anxious, and she had this decreased frequency of these visual illusions that she was having. This is what I'm saying, where we're kind of verging into that mental health. So she was imagining everything balancing on a pin, and she was also struggling with corners, and things seemed to change shape on her. So there was something in her perceptual world that was really causing problems, or is it that the anxiety was causing her so much stress that she lost perceptual constancy? I don't know, and we don't know the answer to that, but we do see that when she put in the regulation 2, that her function improved dramatically in a very short period of time, and she was able to ride in the car to resume extracurricular activities. So within 2 weeks, she met her goals, and so we increased function and got this young lady back into her life. So she did attend her 8th grade graduation ceremony. It makes me feel like a grandmother to support somebody from a distance. It's very fun, so I appreciate helping you all out and that you're letting me share your cases with you. That she was able to spend time with 2 friends, overall much less anxious, and Erin herself, this young lady, reported herself 75 to 80% back to normal. So at times when she was fatigued, she still experienced a lesser degree of the sound and tactile sensitivity. And I do want to say that I was also received an email this morning from her therapist saying that, you know, where would you go next? I'm seeing her today, so it might be right about this time that she's being seen, because those visual illusions that she's having are still causing some anxiety. Now, I don't know if we can move into that, but I'm going to say to you why regulation 2 worked for her is it has these specific sound filters that are very subtle in it. And so when we see people with that difficulty with environmental sound, especially startle, and part of panic is getting stuck in a startle. When we see that getting stuck in the part of the startle, the regulation 2 can be quite helpful. So what I recommended was that she continue on other quick shifts to help keep that anxiety at bay, because I think the anxiety is making the visual illusions worse. And but there is something about space. So there is a space quick shift, and that she might also want to try something from the spatially enhanced line to see if that would help, if there is something perceptual that is causing the disturbance. And it might be that we don't know why this young lady had all these panic attacks, but when she got into panic, her sensory systems get out of balance. And so helping her balance those at least might help her regulate some more of that. I also suggested looking at vestibular ocular, and there might be something very subtle going on there, and that's another potential possibility. But now this young lady, Erin, is in a place where her therapist is going to be able to do a little bit more direct assessment now that she's calmed down. So again, not the answer to everything, but really very, very helpful. And for her, going back to modulated was not the place that I think she needs to go. And we're going to be discussing in this webinar how we often use the quick shifts in terms of getting stuck, anxiety, whenever there's an overarching anxiety feature around something, even if the sound sensitivity is so severe that it causes anxiety, we might use a quick shift first, or at least embedded in the protocol. So that will be part of your decision making in quick shifts, and then you're going to see we're going to move into how the modulated music is really much more about focusing the ear so that you can tune into what's important and ignore what's not, and what's important is going to be in that vocal range, because we are wired for speech and language. And when you get into that ability to tune the muscles of the middle ear to speech and language, you also tap into the social engagement nervous system. So that whole ability of attunement is going to be something we're going to be talking about, where you can tune the ear in. And so we will differentiate this anxiety piece and a couple of other features that the quick shifts give us with this ability to tune in and tune out the ear. And tuning in the ear will lead us to better ability to auditorily discriminate, as well as better ability to attend auditorily, as well as overall attention, if that is part of the factor. So we're going to move into this in more depth here in the rest of the webinar. Historically, therapeutic listening, which just reminds me of another email that I received from somebody. I started with therapeutic listening and I got X, and I thought she was talking about one that was so generic I couldn't answer her question. I kind of did impulsively, to realize that she wasn't talking about what I thought she was talking about. So whatever that means. Therapeutic listening has many subcategories. So modulated music is what many people think about, and we're going to be addressing modulated music next and comparing it. But then I just want to say to you that modulated music and fine-tuning are ways of using filtering that help focus the middle ear mechanism, and we're going to talk about that next and why that's so important. And it's going to be, we're going to choose that for people who can't tune in and can't attune to another, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So that is going to be something that we use for auditory attention, auditory distractibility, and the basic tenets of just basically tuning in. Spatially enhanced is something we're going to use to enhance space and add a little bit of discriminative qualities, but that's about space. And then we'll be really juxtaposing modulated and quick shifts today, but I wanted to put it into a bigger frame. And the quick shifts are an offshoot of gear shifters, which are a longer version of binaural beat technology. So hopefully that doesn't confuse anyone. We really invited to this webinar people who had a background in therapeutic listening, and quick shifts are the only people that we extended an invitation to, and there may be others online, and if so, just know that this is coming out of a bigger picture. So when we're talking about using filtering, like a high-low pass filter that gets used in modulated music, and then the high-low pass filter along with the narrow band filters that we use in fine-tuning, we're talking about aiming at this middle ear function. So basically, right here in the middle ear, you have 3 tiny bones and 2 muscles. And this middle ear mechanism is going to function once information comes in the ear and goes up to the brain. There are feedback loops that help tune the ear. So help you zoom in on what's important. So that middle ear mechanism is your focusing mechanism, okay? And when you focus the ear, what you can do is you can tune in on what's important and ignore what is not. And so what the ear is geared or programmed to tune into is human voice. So it allows you to extract human voice from a crowded background. We're also going to see that that middle ear mechanism is very tied up with the social engagement nervous system. So the hardwiring that we come with that allows us to tune into each other, to read each other and understand each other in terms of understand each other socially and emotionally. So that part of using modulated music or fine-tuning or anything with a filter is about attuning the ear or getting this focusing mechanism to work. So it is really built off of the acoustic sound reflex. So we know that if you have a loud sound that happens in the background, that the middle ear muscles will contract to protect you from that loud sound. But we know that same mechanism also has a discriminative function to it. And that function, particularly more so of, there are two muscles, the hammer muscle, which works on the eardrum, and the stapedius, which works on the oval window. They both contract in terms of blocking out loud sound, okay? However, the stapedius muscle has a special function in that when it contracts, it allows you to tune into human voice or the frequencies in the vocal range over the background. So enhancing the human voice. So you have in sort of these diagrams, and this is all refresher for many of you who have been through the therapeutic listening course, but basically when the stapedius is inactive and you hear background sound and a voice, the background sound will mask or cover up. It's a lot like those of you who, and I can think of, and this is a, hopefully, this is an American reference, and I don't know, but all over the United States, there's cheesecake factories. They're giant restaurants that everything in them is stone. And if you go in there on a Friday night, you cannot really almost hear your table mate because you have to, that middle ear has to work really hard. So the low sounds of the background can cover up the high sounds. And there's going to be a certain intensity level where that happens for everyone. But what we know is in many of our kids, the classroom is like the Cheesecake Factory or some really loud restaurant. And I'm sure no matter where you live, you've had that experience of a giant restaurant with poor acoustics or a bar or a pub, I guess you would call it. So that middle ear mechanism of focusing in is really critically important. And we know that that is very connected. So the stapedius muscle is innervated by the 7th cranial nerve. So that is going to be connected with facial expression, as well as the 5th cranial nerve for the muscles of the jaw. And as a matter of fact, the 10th cranial nerve, which is the vagus nerve, and it is actually divided into 2 separate branches. One of them, the newer, more evolved vagus, or myelinated vagus, or sometimes it's called ventral vagus, actually innervates the heart and lungs and helps do this sensory modulation function of allowing you to get a little bit excited to notice something, and this is what we talk about as the orienting response, and then, oh, regulate that with your breath. So the heart acting like sort of the gas and the breath acting like the brake so that you can modulate your attention level. So that when you impact middle ear function, you impact facial expression, you impact indeed the connection with the middle ear muscles, and all of the facial muscles when you are orienting is connected with this level of the vagus that calms your physiology. So not only can we, through the middle ear, increase that focusing mechanism, but we also can affect the neurophysiological centers for regulation and social engagement. So basically, the intent for the use of modulated music, and you can put that also into fine-tuning for those of you who are advanced trained, is to train the middle ear to shift between foreground and background and focus on the speech sounds. That allows you for the basic tenets of auditory discrimination as well as auditory attention. And then we know that when we get into that middle ear focusing mechanism, we actually are connected with all of that entire social engagement or the social nervous system. So that is another reason, and you're going to see that in a case that Tracy's going to do with you here at the end, and also part of the rationale why when I was telling you about at Camp Jabiru, for the kids with eating anxiety, we're using Quickshifts, but for the kids, the little girl that I was talking about, and I can't remember her name, Darling, little blonde with a ponytail, and who really couldn't focus in, and when I used the modulated music, the Mozart for modulation, she was making friends and talking, and I actually had the pleasure at Jabiru, we did a research study using the Canadian Occupational Performance Model of doing Mom's exit interview, and she's like, she talked to a friend, and her goals for her were like 3s, and all of her social goals Mom went to a 10, and she said to me, can I give her higher than a 10? Do you have a higher number? I'm so excited about her talking and socializing. So that, you know, using the modulated music more for that, the quick shifts more for anxiety is part of a big, like if you just need a basic point, and I'm going to go into some more details now. So the use of modulated music, if somebody's not orienting to sound, they can't tune into sound, they're having issues with sound, getting really dysregulated in noisy environments, that one often takes quite a bit of detective work to notice in terms of if people are having trouble in noisy environments, because some of your kids, you can't see that, you just see that when things get busy, they melt down, and you're thinking it may be simply bad behavior. Many kids, if you're able to give a test that discerns that, and the best one, unfortunately, has become out of date. If you can find it, the Goldman-Bristow test of auditory discrimination. Why I love that test is that it was designed for speech and language professionals. However, it's very much an OT test where kids are going to respond to and just point to pictures that are very simple and quiet, and then halfway through the test, it's exactly what a classroom would sound like, and that comes on the headphones, and then they're just doing the same thing they were doing before. And many, many, many kids sit through the first part with just ease, and as soon as that noise comes on, you see all of the behaviors that people are reporting as dysregulated come on. Once had a mom say to me, can I please have that CD? I want to take it to the gym teacher because the gym teacher can't understand why his behavior is so bad in the gym, but now I understand it. So, but he was a young man that you might not, just by looking, be able to tell that. He just looked like he was misbehaving. So that sometimes that dysregulation in noisy environments takes a little detective work on your part. Sensory defensiveness with spatial elements is another reason why we would tend to use the modulated music, that low frequency sound sensitivity along with gravitational insecurity. And then any of those difficulties with social engagement, particularly when you want to prime what I'm going to call attunement, social reciprocity, which is more than the voice, it's the face and the body movement and getting your rhythm of interaction just so, because that's what we see come alive with the therapeutic listening. Often on the heels of that, you get more language, because as you get the body more organized in the interaction, you get more language with that. And then, of course, because the middle ear muscles get gunked up with ear infection, we're going to want modulated music to get that system moving again. And the other thing that happens with repeated ear infections is threshold shift. So you sort of want to reboot the middle ear mechanism, if you want to put it that way. So that's modulated. That was kind of a lot of information, and I kind of went through that quickly. So, but many of you have heard that before, because many of you are already trained in therapeutic listening or have been working with that somewhat. So if we want to affect that middle ear mechanism, we're going to use modulated. But in terms of the quick shift albums, the design and intent here is to shift state. Okay, so often I think about if somebody is stuck. If you think about the young lady at the beginning of this course, she was getting stuck and she had high anxiety. We know that alpha brainwaves are important for sort of rebooting the nervous system, if you will. It's the brain's default mechanism, the idle state. That we also want to use it for attentional control, but here it's a more generalized attentional kind of piece, and that we know that alpha brainwave frequencies sort of enhance the filtering of sensory and motor impulses, so that it's a general overall sort of basic tenets of attention. And the other thing why we would use quick shifts and why they can be blended with the modulated is that they have an immediate impact on state. And Tracy's going to be talking about that in treatment, and they have an immediate impact on attention as well as physical performance. We often see an immediate impact on fluidity of movement, bilateral integration, timing, and sequencing directly after. So anything that you're doing in the clinic around these things, it can enhance. So the picture would be clinical anxiety. So we're getting more and more kids with anxiety, and often you're going to see these problems overlaid with modulated. And basically, you can use these two tools together, and you'll see how that was done in some of the treatment approaches. So stress and trauma. When physical patterns of defense are held in the body, what we know about trauma is in part in the body, that you actually get stuck or in truncated defensive posturing. You don't complete a defensive response. You sort of get stuck or frozen. So this anxiety, freeze in the body, just to me screams, try a quick shift. And again, usually you do see an immediate sort of softening or shift. Poor bilateral coordination and praxis. So a quick shift is going to, because of the binaural beat is being processed by both sides of the brain, and once you entrain to it, you have both hemispheres resonating. We see an immediate impact on bilaterality, 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 eyes working better together, the 2 sides of the body. We also see the 2 hemispheres working together. And so if you think of that right hemisphere, which is more about body and space and implicit knowing, body knowing, sensory motor feelings, and the left hemisphere about language, putting those 2 pieces together is part of what you need to do for praxis. So anytime somebody gets stuck, they're inflexible. My husband, Ron Frick, who designed the tools, was sort of a traveling bard at Camp Jabiru, and it was really fun because he got to go in, and he's very, very, very good at selecting music for kids, for anyone, basically. And, you know, he was using rhythmic raspberry for a child who would not go on the climbing wall, not because it was the climbing wall, because it had a spider on it. And what I have to say to all you Australians, I would agree with them, because in Australia, if a spider bites you, you can die. You know, so I kind of had to agree with the child, but that's not the way the rest of the world thinks. So Ron saw him as getting stuck. And he also could see that he was at a fairly high level. He was more motorically organized. And so he put him on a rhythmic raspberry, which has a shifting rhythm. And so you get entrained to one rhythm and it shifts. It sort of helped him unstick in the rhythm, and helped him unstick because it put him in alpha. And after the rhythmic raspberry, he immediately climbed the wall. So Ron said to me, I think we should rename that as the fear of spiders. Music selection. I thought, no, I don't think so, Ron. I don't think it's that pointed, but it was kind of our joke. So that getting stuck, rigid in routines. We also have seen in the population that is really self-injurious that many of the quick shifts are very helpful. So it is about impacting brainwave states, whereas the modulated is about impacting the middle ear muscles. And those brainwave states, just to let you know, is that you always have all of these brainwave patterns cycling. And it is alpha that we're trying to impact. And what happens is when you get stuck, particularly in anxiety, you start to have an imbalance with a lot more of these really fast vibrations in beta, but particularly at the higher end of beta. And alpha is sort of the reboot, the reset. Even people who do neurofeedback, where they train the brainwaves really specifically, we're doing something very general, but where they train really specifically, use alpha to reset, reboot. It's kind of like your iPhone, which mine is sitting right here, right? But when it doesn't work, what do I have to do? I have to hold down 2 buttons simultaneously till it turns on and turns back on. So I think of it as that reboot, as that way to move into that just right zone. So we put it here, and we borrowed from Julia Wilbarger her chart with levels of arousal. And I'm not going to go into all of the levels of arousal, but basically we're trying to get people into the just right level of arousal where they can function. And this would be in terms of, if you're looking at zones of arousal, this would be the green zone. And if you're looking at how does your engine run, this is my engine is running just right. Okay, so in the just right zone, what you have is this mid-range here is alpha. The top here would be more beta, or more focused attention. The thing that we're going to see is the person who is adaptable can get excited, but then they calm down. They can get excited and they recover. They get excited and they recover. And every time this keeps their modulation in check. It's this recovery reset that the alpha does. It is in people with defensiveness and high levels of anxiety that they get excited and they move quickly out of that just right zone. And the problem is that they cannot reset, reboot, come back down. So that often sort of smacks of that it would be helpful to use the quick shift. What we're doing in quick shifts, unlike the filtering, is using binaural beat technology. And basically what you see is that you, in some way, and we do it by shifting channels, and we're not going to go into that in great depth and detail, create 2 varying pulses on each side in each ear. Because we see that the brain waves are measured in cycles per second, or hertz, and basically everything up through this beta is in a pulse that is a pulse, not a tone. You start to hear things as a connected sound or a tone at between 20 and 25 hertz. So these brain waves are slower, so you have to create a beat or a pulse, and you do that by differencing the 2 ears, and we do it by shifting the channels. So that the brain, what it does is it follows that pulse. You can do it on speakers, and you're going to hear a warble or a beat in the air, and the brain's going to track that and follow it, because that's how we auditorily track things. You do this as a natural phenomena, just like your eyes track, your ears track. So it's going with that auditory localization response. That's part of what we're tapping into, the brain's natural wiring. But when it does it, it actually follows it left to right all the way up the brainstem, and then both hemispheres start resonating together. And so there it is a way of getting this basic bilateral integration. So I'm going to just talk to you about a couple cases, and then Tracy will come in and speak about a few more cases. And then it looks like it's potentially possible that we may have some time for questions. I know that we've sort of asked you to hold those, and you guys have been really good about that. So Susan was a 65-year-old adult that came to us from a friend who was a psychologist, and her clinical picture was she was having an extreme reaction. So now think about this. This sort of starts to bleed into anxiety. She didn't talk about it as anxiety, but her extreme reaction to an air compressor in a nearby power plant was like really impacting her quality of life. She couldn't stay in her house. She had a beautiful home in an older part of the university area of Madison, where she lived with her husband in a very happy marriage. That wasn't the problem, but she was feeling like she was going to have to move out and live somewhere else because this air compressor was just bothering her. Additionally, she was sensitive to fans, mechanical noises, hand dryers, large city traffic, loud music for extended periods of time. if she was in public events and somebody was chewing gum, clearing their throat, sniffling, or coughing, she would have to get up and leave. And she said occasionally, if I was in a small enough group, and she was a lovely lady, really beautiful personality, she would kindly ask somebody, and she wasn't kind of shy about it, and I like really appreciated that about her, if they could stop chewing gum, because otherwise she was going to have to go. As a child, she had this. She hated when people would whisper in school. She was anxious and overwhelmed and triggered by auditory stimuli. She had to wear noise-canceling headphones and earplugs at home, which we know is a stopgap, but what we also know is that makes the problem worse. Anytime you remove sensation, you become more sensitive to it. So the noise-canceling headphones were not actually solving the problem. It was a, what do you call that? A compensatory strategy. So she also had significant struggles with any excessive noises that put her in fight flight. And when we did work with her, we did also do some work with her with, she was kind of stuck in those tension patterns that you would, if you were to go, or feel like that sort of first phase of the moro or startle with that sort of high shoulders, sort of breath holding kind of piece, that we did work with that component with her as well. Her clinical picture was claustrophobic, that dislike of heights, extreme irritation to light touch, overly sensitive to pain and lights, and she did have a tactile component, which we often see riding along with this anxiety, over-responsivity to the low-frequency sound. So we did do a combination of modulated music for her, the Mozart for modulation and the easy listening, but then we quickly put in a regulation 2 quick shift, then went to an early Mozart, and then nature sound. So we're juxtaposing the modulated with the quick shift. So in this case, and you know, we're treating an adult, and I have a lot of experience. I'm mixing up all the rules here, but we started with modulated. She reported some success. We went to a regulation 2. Things started to shift for her. So we went to an early Mozart, some success. We put her on nature sounds, huge change for her. So between that regulation 2 and nature sounds, now we're saying, wow, there's something about when you add nature sounds and a quick shift. So we put her on a space quick shift, which is a combination, and then finish with a nature sounds. And through that, and doing what we call tension releasing exercises, the TRE, melting on a power-up ball. We did a little bit of wiggle jiggles. Those of you that have been to a lot of our webinars or in-person workshops know that sort of code for some oscillatory movements, some of it hands-on, and some weight-bearing proprioceptive awareness kind of exercises. And then we also paired that with controlled weight shifts and movements with respiration in 4-point child's pose. In supine, engaging the inner core, pelvic floor, and breath. So a lot of that body work. And so basically what we were able to do at the end of this, particularly the nature sounds and the quick shifts, were big changes. She stayed in her house, and at one point she said she got out of the car and her friend had to remind her about the air compressor. So we saw like a huge shift in all of that. So I'm going to let Tracy come in and do a few more cases for you.
Thank you, Sheila. So we'll kind of keep going, as Sheila said, and continue to show you case examples as to how and why we select certain albums based upon a client's clinical picture. So our next client is Henry. Henry was 7 years of age when he was seen at our clinic. His primary concerns at the time that he was being seen was a lot around his difficulties with feeding and eating, especially mealtime. It was really important to the family that they were able to eat together as a family, and Henry's challenges with being able to even tolerate having food that he disliked on the table, not even on his plate, was interfering so much that the family was having a hard time joining together for mealtime. So that was a big concern of theirs, as well as his limited food repertoire. He tended to be a little more over-responsive to sounds, and he had some social anxiety, specifically in environments that were new or more unfamiliar to him, or new situations where he would be meeting or interacting with new friends that tended to be a little bit more anxiety-provoking. as well as anxiety around transitions and changes in his routine or his day. So we already start to get, just over those 4 bullet points, this general idea of kind of stress and anxiety for Henry being one of the biggest concerns for him. We then continued on and did some clinical observations to give us more information on what's going on for Henry. Most of his standardized assessments were within functional limits, so nothing big jumped across there. He had some very subtle challenges with postural stability, dynamic surfaces, but subtle. He was a very active kid, and that wasn't a big concern in terms of the clinical speaking as well as functionally speaking. He did have some tendencies for breath holding or some respiratory patterns where he would kind of stop breathing for a minute. Especially, we started to see that more when he was asked to kind of pair movement and moving on dynamic surfaces. Sometimes we would see that. But also you can imagine that his breath holding tendencies would also come up during the previously mentioned concerns that the family had, probably during those social situations where it was hard for him to interact, he had more anxiety. He would probably stop breathing in those situations as well. He also had some body tension patterns similar to Susan in that he was holding a lot of tension in his body. He could be stiff at times, kind of opened up in a lot of ways. In terms of the music that was selected for Henry, there was a combination of some of the modulated music, but the quick shifts were really the biggest piece for him because of his strong presenting concerns with anxiety. So Henry did kind of a rotation through the quick shifts. The regulation albums were very helpful for him, as well as gentle focus. Oral motor he chose to do where they participated in prior to mealtime events. They would have Henry listen before then, as well as motor organization. Henry really loved the quick shifts. At one point when he had came to therapy that day, his therapist said, you know, we don't have to do any music today. You already did your music for the day, so we don't have to do any. And Henry was kind of like appalled by this and said, no, I want to listen. I want to feel good. He was able to recognize in himself how the music made that shift to kind of finding that just right state of arousal, and that was something that felt really good to Henry. They saw a greater increase in his confidence and decreased tears. He was more willing to try new activities, new experiences. He joined the Boy Scouts. He was really open to new situations where he would have to present himself and involve himself in new activities and with new people, which, remember, that social piece was really challenging and anxiety-provoking for him. He was able to have nice improvements and shifts in terms of his eating and mealtime, which was one of the family's major concerns. He was now able to sit during the family meals. Even if there were those undesirable foods on the table, Henry was now able to tolerate that. He was more open to foods. He wanted to start trying new foods. His mother and him started making new recipes in the kitchen and trying to create things, and they made, a new recipe, and then Henry had said to Mom, oh, I'd really like to try making carrot cake next. So he wanted to get more adventures from food, but that was from an internal wanting to get there. It wasn't predisposed that, okay, each week we're going to pick out a new food to try. He wanted to do this. It was internally motivating for him. And at that point, he had met all of his treatment goals, and he was really seen for a relatively short period of time. It was a limited number of sessions. It spanned over about a 6 to 8 month period in which he was seen, but he was only seen in total for 8 sessions. The last case that I'm going to share with you is the case of Brandon. So we're going to juxtapose Brandon and Henry. Brandon, like Henry, was 7 years of age when he was first seen. In terms of his challenges or his concerns that were brought at the time of the initial evaluation, it was primarily around his participation in his school environment. Mom was really concerned because the teacher had brought up to her on several occasions, most recently at some recent parent-teacher conferences, that she was concerned the teacher was with his performance in school, specifically being very distractible. Brandon was somebody who was very social in the classroom environment and wanted to interact with his friends, but he had a very difficult time paying attention in school. He was often very distractible and just didn't look like he was paying attention. It looked very, he would hum and just kind of be all over the place. And so the teacher brought to Mom, I'm really concerned that he may have an ADHD diagnosis, something with attention's going on. So now we have that attentional piece, that tuning in piece for Brandon that looks a little bit different than we did for Henry, as well as we had more concerns with his overall vestibular postural integration. He had very poor posture. He would frequently rest his head on his desk at school. He was self-conscious and didn't want to look different from peers, and Mom brought that up because the teacher had wanted to implement some strategies within the classroom environment, and Brandon just wasn't really receptive to that because he was at an age that he recognized that other people were going to notice, and he didn't want to be different than his friends. And he didn't really understand why he was getting in trouble at school. He really felt like he was doing the best that he could, and he didn't understand why he was picked out of his peers as being problematic. In terms of his emotional regulation, he was a little bit quick to anger, emotion. There was kind of none of that mid-range. He would kind of either be really happy or all of a sudden he would be having kind of this meltdown. Mom said that she wasn't at all concerned with his performance on school tasks in the home environment. So interesting, no real concerns with attention when the environment is quiet. So we have that piece that Sheila's bringing about in noisy environments. He looks more distractible and more dysregulated. But in a quiet environment where there's less auditory going on, he was able to attend and complete all of his homework without multiple prompts from his family. He didn't like to be moved unexpectedly. He was very social and had lots of friends. And then just another interesting piece, that winter was kind of a challenging time for Brandon. And so Mom brought that up to me because she wanted me to be aware of this particular period of time that's a little bit harder for him. In terms of his musical progression, I started Brandon with the modulated music because of his difficulties tuning into the strong attentional component. I really wanted to get that filtering of the middle ear to tap into those more automatic processes so he could tune into the teacher and so he wasn't as distracted by everything that was going on in his environment. With the modulated music, we saw significant improvements with his attention at school. The teacher was no longer commenting that he looked as distractible. He also had improved academic performances. He had been struggling with completing a challenging math test, and one of the days he came in a couple weeks into treatment, and he was so excited because he had passed that math test today, and that was really important and exciting for him. He came in, I think this was his second session, and he said, I feel really great. I feel like this therapy is helping me change. I feel stronger. Totally unprompted, that was what he wanted to share with me. Overall improved mood as well. I then added in later, after we did a progression of the modulated music, using some of the quick shifts, but I used the quick shifts in an intensive format where I was seeing Brandon in the summer for 4 days in a row. And so I would have him listen not only in the session to really support that motor performance, bilaterality, fluidity of movement, but also he would listen just one time of day when he would go home. With that, we started to see improved bilateral motor coordination. I did an infinity walk with him, very different pre and post in terms of his overall coordination and fluidity of movement. His body started to be a little bit more relaxed, to decrease that tension patterns and decrease frequency of meltdowns at home. So the other thing that we wanted to share with you guys is that the quick shifts are currently available. As some of you may be aware, the quick shifts are available on our Therapeutic Listening app for immediate download, which is really exciting. But now we have the modulated albums that are coming onto the app as well. And so those will be available by the end of the day on the 17th. So be sure to look for those. We have a couple really fun options with that. Not only can families have now immediate access to being able to use the modulated albums right away, right after they leave their treatment session, but we also have the option with the app to have a rental of an album, so the family will be able to rent the album for a 2-week time period, and then you're able to change the albums every 2 weeks as we recommend in the Therapeutic Listening modulated progression. So we kind of outlined some of the musical options now that we're kind of getting this shift and having more options. You can do the Stanza Clip Plus player and micro SD cards, and you can do individual albums. You can do a library of 5 albums like you would for your starter pack. In the Therapeutic Listening course, we offer starter packs. Those will now be available on one single chip so that you can use in clinic, or there's a potential for a custom library working with Vital Sounds to develop that. We're really loving still using, even with having the app available and having the music on our phone or our tablet device, we still really like using the micro SD card and player in the clinical setting, and then having our families purchase and use on their portable device, their app, on an iPhone or an Android device. And so we're having that really nice balance of being able to really make this accessible for a lot of families without having to purchase the additional player. So that's really exciting. If you are listening on your app, we do recommend putting it on airplane mode while the child or you are listening. It seems to be kind of the best way to go so that you're not interrupted with a phone call or an email coming in. So I'm going to invite Sheila to come back in and take some questions.
Okay, so somebody is asking, can you please review how the difference in hertz helps the brain to pay attention? Well, basically the difference in hertz when you, and I don't know the person asking this, if you want more depth, really coming to the Quickshift webinar would be a really good idea where we can go into this in a lot more depth. But basically, it's through the principles of entrainment that the brain is, and all of our electrical activity in our body is subject to the physical principles of entrainment or synchronization. So what happens is when the brain is following the difference between the 2 ears it's really about an 8 hertz, somewhere in 8 and 10 hertz range, the brain starts to pay attention to and tune into that 8 hertz pulse, which causes the brain to go into alpha. And alpha is what primes attention, and we know that from research. So that's really in a nutshell. And somebody's asking, are there any change to the lending library rules now that you have made the app available? You know, the truth of the matter is that we did the app with the lending library because we ran into difficulties with lending libraries. It turns out that for most of the music that Vital Sound sells is they have the performance royalty, but they do not, because we recorded the music, but they don't hold the songwriting royalty. And it turns out that copyright rules are really gray right now, and we actually ran into some legal issues with lending libraries, and we would like to keep you safe from that. And we can't say if you're doing a lending library, unless it's a nonprofit and charging money, that you can't possibly run into legal issues. And that was not something that we knew, and we actually ran into legal issues, and it was quite expensive. And in the end, we were vindicated, but we really don't want to put you in that situation. So we're not recommending that you do a lending library and charge money. If you are a nonprofit, then that's a different story. But if you are making money in the process of lending, and that would be even if you're making money and you're not a nonprofit clinic and you're just giving out the music, you're in the gray zone of copyright, and somebody can come after you. It won't be us, but there are other people that hold royalties on the music. So it gets really sticky. So we can't say, but we're just saying probably not a good idea. The rental price on the app for parents, if they choose to purchase something after the rental, how much money they spent on the rental will be deducted from the price. So, so back to when using Quickshifts with a modulated program, do you have the child listen to the Quickshift 2 times a day? Tracy, I'm going to let you answer that because I think you're clearer than I am.
Well, I'll try to be. So it depends. It depends how you're using them, in all honesty, and how we've presented it thus far. Usually when I'm using the Quickshift, it's still that 2 times a day, sometimes 1 time a day. Like with Henry, I gave the example of using the Quickshift before mealtime, and so that was that 1 time a day. But I've also used at a very advanced level using the modulated in combination with the Quickshift, so that 1 time a day they're listening to the modulated and 1 time a day they're listening to the Quickshift. So it depends what you're going after in the frequency of having you use them. In a more traditional therapeutic listening approach than I would have. If I'm integrating it into, instead of doing a modulated album, I'm choosing a quick shift, I still will have the client listen 2 times a day.
Yeah, and then somebody's asking about if the parent buys the modulated, your number is necessary every single time they make an album purchase so that for the modulated. So the best way to do it would be in your clinic, so you could put your number in and then parents won't have it. Because every purchase they make, a question is going to come up and ask them for your number, and say that I am agreeing that I'm a therapist trained or being supervised by this therapist whose number I'm using. So that's still going to be tracked. The PowerPoint slides from the presentation, we gave you other handouts, but we haven't made those available. So you could, and you could, Tracy said you could do the quick shifts if you wanted to. They're a tool, so you can use them only in the clinic if you wanted. That was kind of how we started. But then I'm going to say to you, a lot of people started doing them as if they were doing therapeutic listening and had good success with that, so that's an option, or a 1 time a day. They make for a lot more flexibility. Do you have
headphones?
Okay. What is the question?
Headphones when using the app.
Okay, when you're using the app on the phone, in terms of, if you're just using quick shifts, the headphones don't matter. If you're using the modulated, we still want you to use the high quality Sennheiser. So if you're using the quick shifts, and say that many times Tracy and I start with the quick shifts, and maybe we don't have an intent to go to the modulated, so we don't have people buy the Sennheiser headphones, we just ask them to use anything that covers the ear. So if you are going to do regular therapeutic listening, you still need the high quality headphones. Okay. Okay, so there's quite a few questions coming in, so we'll scroll through them. So the music is not compressed on the iPhone. We have embedded a player in it that plays it with full frequency. We do use headphones, so we're getting things confused. So, and I think sometimes you type a question when I'm talking, so it gets out of sequence for me. So Jennifer, we do use headphones, high quality headphones, when we're doing the modulated on the app. If you're doing the quick shifts on the app, we would suggest that you use headphones that cover the ears, no earbuds, but they don't have to be the high quality ones. You can also use the app on your phone and connect it to speakers, or something that I showed people in a workshop last week is if you get a glass bowl and put your iPhone in it, it acts like a speaker. So there are children under 2 where we don't use headphones, or Tracy and I were working in a clinic for children with autism and seeing child after child a couple of weeks ago, and this little girl came in that was so anxious. I've never seen anything like it in a 3-year-old, but I'm sure some of you have, because I'm hearing reports of this, that us, strangers, putting headphones on her would have been, and we only had an hour with her, so I actually had the quick shift on my phone, and I turned it on, and I set it on the play kitchen we were playing in, because we didn't have an SI gym here, we were just consulting, and I started to play with her, and she let me into her play, she got less rigid in her play, so it could be helpful in that way too.
Maria's asking about cost effectiveness. Can a family mostly use quick shifts to achieve target behavior?
The question, I wouldn't do it based on cost, because now with the rental of the app, it is just as cost effective. If that child cannot attune the ear, you need the modulated. People often think that. And if somebody has extreme anxiety, you need the quick shifts. So I wouldn't do anything based on price treatment-wise. And one of the reasons why we did the 2-week rental is
$9.50.
$9.50. So that made it really just as affordable as downloading a quick shift. And then again, then you can find things that work super well, and if there's something that is really organizing in the modulated that you choose to use in a sensory diet and parents were to purchase it, that $9.50 would be taken off the price. Melissa, you're going back to the #1 frequently most asked question. Any tips to getting kids to keep headphones on? It's really patience and calmness in your own body. I sometimes would say approach from behind. That's not always the best issue, is getting them connected and getting them to feel safe, and all of the great OT ways that you know to do that. But top tips are Thomas the Train, bubbles, and something that if the child loves anything food-wise, to use that as a snack are some of my top ways of doing it. And then number 4 would be getting them on a swing that they like, and that often works too.
In terms of somebody had asked about the distractibility, if you're using the app on the phone, having the phone be distractible to the child. I think one of the things that we have done is we've tried to attach the phone via Velcro, to the headphones, and not even make a big deal that the phone's even a part of it. Same as you would with the player, just flip the headphones on and try not to make it a big deal. Also having it on, the airplane mode, then they can't access the internet, and if you can do a lock screen, then that will keep them from getting into the phone. So it usually hasn't been very much of an issue. So
okay, and there's a good question, Maureen, that I want to answer, and it kind of bleeds into Christine's about if you're using them in open air, how do they will affect other people in the room. But I'm going to say to you, so I'm so glad you asked that. If you're in a clinic with a lot of people and a lot of noise, using them open air is a bad idea. You've got to get somewhere where there's not a lot of other auditory distraction. I know that I've been in some clinics. I was in one and it was somewhere in North Carolina or South Carolina, and it was just like a warehouse with huge, which is cool in a way, but there could be 15 kids in that room. There's no way they can use that in there unless they get some corner or a carrel where sound is really cut out. So you have to think about if you are over speakers. When Tracy and I were doing it in Milwaukee on that consult, we were actually in a play kitchen, which kind of in a carol, like an office carol, and there was not any real competing sound. So if you're going to do it over open air, that would be the way to do it. And then Christine had, you can do external speakers. So go ahead, Teresa. There was another question you thought I should answer.
Somebody was asking about a 2-week rental for the Quickshifts. We don't have that option. The 2-week rental is just for the modulated music.
Yeah.
The Quickshifts people just usually purchase.
What we found is when a Quickshift works, you see it work in the clinic and people usually purchase them. We don't do the 2-week rental because it's something you can use over and over again. Gentle focus, oral motor, regulation 2, and centered focus are on my phone. I use them all the time and I ship through them just to get me focused. And, we live in a world where anxiety kind of creeps up, especially if you answer a million emails a day and do webinars where things don't always go right, etc. So I use them myself, and we might be doing a challenge with you guys. Look for that coming soon where we might have you guys use them as well. Yeah, so the quality of, hi Vivian, the quality of the speakers will matter, and again, we can't give you exactly what speakers. The problem that we deal with over and over and over and over again using sound therapeutically is that electronics change constantly. So something that just doesn't sound tinny. And then the quality of the space that you do it in, the quality of the auditory space. So it looks like we addressed, and I just want to get to one more Bozina had asked about. Yes, I do work with kids who can't give verbal feedback and are immobile. And in that, Bozina, we do a lot of reading of physiology, so a lot of watching the breath, a lot of watching skin color, breath rate and rhythmicity and depth, tone. When you're working with the multiply impaired kids, their tone changes. So those would be some of the things that I would look at. And yes, we are currently using the Quickshifts in particular with adults with strokes, just to help them, particularly one side goes down, so getting that communication across the hemispheres. So I think that it has lots of implications in geriatrics and dementia as well, especially they're finding that different pieces of music. And so the Quickshifts would be a really fun way to play with that. And I currently am advising on a 90-year-old with a stroke at this point in time. So we'll probably have more feedback on that. If you do that, we'd really like you to make sure you write your functional goals and track those, and because we're going to be trying to collect more clinical research and move into evidence-based research, basically, where we can inform some of the researchers, but we need to really kind of shore up our documentation, and you'll be seeing more webinars on that coming soon. So FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome, yes, that would be a very appropriate place to use the Quickshifts. Okay, so I think we ran over a little bit here, and we did, those of you that were the first 100 on got on. We had been promised by WebEx that we actually had a lot more people who were supposed to be allied, and we had a promise from WebEx. We had about 20 calls into them to make sure they would let you all on, and they didn't. And so I just want to let you know, if you have a friend who is supposed to get on, we'll be sending recordings to all those people, and I'll also be talking with our representatives today. So we're really sorry about that. It was completely out of our control if your friends didn't get on, but please let them know that we will be addressing it and getting back to them with recordings. So we really appreciate it. We're glad all of you people that got on early and beat it, because there was another really almost 200 more people that wanted to be on this call, and we had made arrangements for it, but somehow our WebEx let us down. So we apologize for that. We tried our best. So anyway, but it was very fun. Thank you all for your time, and hopefully we'll be seeing you back at another webinar soon.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for attending, everybody. Just a couple bits of follow-up before we have you guys go. It's going to be, there will be a follow-up email sent to the email that you registered with in about 24 hours. You are welcome to scan that barcode that was a couple slides back. Let me make myself the host so I can show that to you guys. That barcode will bring up the Therapeutic Listening app so that you can easily download it or have your family do so. So feel free to use this QR code barcode here to get to the app. Also, in your course materials are instructions for downloading the app. So if you need to use those for yourself or any of the families you are using this with or any other clinicians, feel free to do so. And again, that is going to be in your course materials, which can be found through this link that was just posted in your chat box. So feel free to use that if you'd like to. Thank you again for attending. Have a great day.